Welcome back to Beyond the Crime, the podcast that takes you into the minds of criminals with your hosts Dr. Lars Madsen, Shay Addison, and Dr. Rob Brockman.
Okay, everybody, welcome to this episode of Beyond the Crime, episode 5. Today we're covering something called the Incel phenomenon, worldview, presentation, risks and therapy. Joining me, Rob Brockman, today is Shay Addison and Lars Madsen. Welcome.
G'day, Rob.
Welcome,
G'day,
guys.
Lars. Good to be back.
Hey guys. Hello.
We have this very interesting and important topic to get through today and a lot to cover. Yeah, this is a really fairly hot topic. It's sort of, I find in general media and things, the word incel being thrown around quite a lot. So I thought, we thought it might be very interesting to cover, and also in forensic settings as well. I think this kind of presentation also getting more traction.
It's a phenomena that seems to have only been around or come about in the last decade or so, isn't it, really? I mean, were these concepts sort of relevant 30 years ago? Maybe they were, but not in the way that we see it now, I guess.
Yeah, the visibility through social media, I think, really plays into that, where people can see it much more visibly.
It reminds me also of the episode we did on CEM or child exploitation material, because what we're seeing is some of these, things that might be criminogenic or risk factors or outright crimes, following this sort of the surge of the internet and that the connectability that the internet providing a sort of forums and capacity to share ideas and information and things like that. So we thought in terms of understanding what we mean by the word incel, just quickly, this is a shortened name for the words involuntary celibate. Okay, or someone who experiences being celibate, but experiences that from an involuntary position. I've summarized some ideas from a researcher surnamed is Cotti, full name Simon Cotti, published in 2020. He published an article called Incel Emotives, Resentment, Shame and Revenge. So I really like the sort of summary he provides. And so he summarizes the incel worldview succinctly as having 3 core components, that of misogyny, victimhood and fatalism. So I'm just going to read straight more or less from his summary. To understand incel-motivated violence and risk assessment, it is helpful to first understand the particularities of the incel worldview and its expression in the incel argot, or subculturally specific language. So incels believe in a rigidly hierarchical sexual marketplace where physical characteristics such as height, facial bone structure and muscle mass determine value. Females' supposed hypergamous nature, that is the inborn tendency to mate with genetically superior males, leads to the incels' so-called 80-20 rule, that the top 20% of men, who are referred to in this worldview as chads, and defined as conventionally attractive white males, monopolize the sexual and romantic attention of 80% of women. Women are categorized within this worldview as Stacies, referring to hyperfeminine and highly attractive women, and Beckies, average or normal women. Females as a group within this worldview are referred to as Foids, which stands for female humanoid, a term meant to dehumanize women. Incels term the discrimination they face due to their inferior physical appearance as societal lookism and consider any attempt to increase their perceived attractiveness as maxing. For example, exercising as a means to increase their sexual market value is referred to as gymaxing. These kind of efforts are usually derided within the incel community as futile and examples of copes. So I thought this was a very interesting summary of the worldview. Shay, you had also something to add?
I guess I just wanted to add that I suppose that everything, we can plot it onto a continuum where you have, from the most extreme to the most sort of non-extreme. And some of the things that are written about incels, I guess, are, some of the more extreme versions of it is that this, as a group, that they call for women to be stripped of their rights and be forced to serve as state-mandated girlfriends or held in concentration camps because they see themselves as sexless victims of women's natures, and they call for them to be broadly contained or controlled accordingly. So that's, a very obviously extreme version. And they have this concept of the red pill and the black pill. The black pill is, in incel sort of ideology, refers to the oppression of them at the hands of biologically malevolent women. And so there's this entire kind of, sort of ideology around, how to sort of characterize women and men, and then they have their ideas or recommendations about how you might sort of right this wrong, with some of it being extremely, extreme. And they feel there's no hope for them to rise in the hierarchy, forever denied sex, nihilistic despair, all this kind of stuff. And then, of course, there's obviously the violence. You have the potential for people to act violently on that in order to try to realize this ideology. But I guess at the other end of the spectrum, I suppose, you also have people who I don't think would necessarily be called incels, but you might have people who hold like hostile attitudes about females or women because they can't get relationships to work. And they might see that,
so that's more
women are dangerous type of attitudes. Yeah, and that's not an uncommon thing.
Everyday chauvinism or
these misogyny kind of or everyday that kind of stuff. And I think that's far more, most people are far more aware of those things. At what point someone becomes an incel or identifies themselves as an incel?
Yeah, this is the key point. Like, it's not that people call, I don't think this is something that other people, it's not a diagnosis or something, but
no,
it's actually more like a self-diagnosis. It's an identity.
It's an identity. Right? That's right. Someone opts into this and says,
you opt in. You say, "This is my experience.
This is me."
So I guess, like, the question for you guys initially is like, why would people opt into this label? Why has that become more of an attractive thing in the community over the last sort of 10 or 15 years?
Well,
Good question.
Well, I think it can be easily understood, I think, in one sense. I mean, we, in our clinic, we have in recent years gotten more referrals in relation to this kind of stuff. And interestingly, from police departments who have been involved in surveilling groups on the internet, who are involved in what would be described as incel groups or extremist groups. I think, I don't know exactly what the police unit is called. But it's
actually ASIO.
Like extremist groups,
it's actually ASIO has written position papers on incels. Okay. So it's actually counterterrorism at an ASIO level, which is really interesting because most types of crime, violent crime, have got nothing. ASIO, doesn't get involved in that yet. With this particular group of people, it's taken the attention at that very high level. And so the initial approaches to this is from a counterterrorism, which means it gets filtered to the police. And if the police identify these guys preemptively, then we've had referrals directly from police to our clinic, which that's a very unusual pathway to get a referral for a treatment client. Normally they come through, after they've committed some crime. So in one way, it's kind of like a preventative measure, I guess.
It absolutely is. And the individuals that end up in the clinic haven't actually done anything, haven't actually committed a violent offence, but they have been online talking about doing that. I mean, it's interesting that, we're talking before about, like, how do people end up here and how does this phenomena sort of evolve? And in the cases that I've been involved in, there is a pattern that you can see. I mean, all the individuals have been young men who have had kind of challenging, difficult childhoods where they've experienced emotional abuse by mum and dad. Parents have split up, a difficult home environment. But they've also really struggled to fit in their community, in their school communities. There's been lots of movements, often to different schools for one reason or another. There's been bullying, sustained, and in some cases really quite violent and precise bullying. So in terms of these kids are sort of almost hunted around the school grounds, and they're having to sort of sit in the disabled toilets during the school time as a way of avoiding being targeted by the students. So they've had this awful experiences. So they themselves will report feeling extremely isolated, extremely alone, extremely powerless. And they find these communities, and the ones that I've talked to who have been referred, one client I'm thinking in particular became fascinated with the idea of school shooting in the US.
Yeah, this is something I've encountered a little bit too. Like there can be a sort of, well, to some degree, the idea of a sort of mass violence is appealing on some level. And the ones that I've had have both sort of been sort of fantasizing a little bit about these kind of things.
These individuals get referred to our clinic is because so on these online groups, how it works is they get together and they share this interest. We'll get back to the story of the fellow that I was telling you about before, but I just want to sort of illustrate this idea of thinking about violence and talking about it. On these incel groups, they'll discuss these ideas and support each other and that type of thing, but they also have this idea of a testament, which is a document that they write out about getting back at the community effectively. And these guys have been flagged by the police because they upload this testament onto their website to show everybody about their plans. And usually their plans will include specific details about some mass murder that they're going to plan.
So this is like, of course, at the extreme end, as Shay points out. The folks who would be participating in this kind of thing would be at the extreme end. I mean, I guess the idea is that others might be egging them on, or at least viewing these things.
I think definitely. I think going back to the fellow that I was talking to you about, he became fascinated with school shooters, and through this fascination and researching these guys on the internet, stumbled across the incel culture, and then managed to get into some of these social groups and found them.
Yeah.
He had the experience once he was within this group of guys that he suddenly felt at home. Suddenly he felt he had found people that understood him, that shared the same kinds of problems. And, it was this sort of, revelation for him of suddenly I'm this isolated, lonely, feeling, invisible and hopeless. And suddenly I have got...
And disconnected from others. I don't have my people. You just mentioned backgrounds involving social alienation, at school and whatnot. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, going through that is trauma, right? For most of our clients, it can be very traumatic. But then part of the solution is to find a community somewhere where you wouldn't have found it, 30 years ago.
So it's like a giant sort of dysfunctional support group in a way. Well, there's a lot of support groups for different things, isn't there? You do all sorts of different mental health presentations, but this is one, like they find it supportive, but it's actually just dysfunctional.
Exactly. And I think that what happens here is that you suddenly can talk and you're a part of this group. And it's almost like, there's this pressure to kind of prove yourself, to be more committed to this group and to this cause through, this rhetoric around...
Extreme rhetoric and
extreme
actions. There's been some high-profile cases, I think, in the States especially.
Yeah, in the States. I'm not so sure here in Australia.
You know what, Lars, what you're talking about there, and Rob, you alluded to it before, it actually has parallels with some of the CEM online groups as well. Where we have these inadequate men that get in and they suddenly have a common interest and they can talk and they can belong and they clamber for status as well. It's very
within the communities.
Yeah, within those really dysfunctional communities. There's a very parallel process to those populations of people.
And the group affiliation, like this sort of identification, affiliating with other group members, leading to seeking status, etc.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, same kind of thing going on.
This is a part of this internet phenomenon. As good as the internet has been for us, it has led to this interesting phenomenon of, new risk factors, new crimes. Like CEM wouldn't have really been a thing, for example, 50 years ago, the way it is now because of the internet.
Yeah. Definitely.
In the same way, this phenomenon probably wouldn't exist if it wasn't for the internet.
Exactly. And I think that in these groups, they become more extreme. They become radicalized through the rhetoric, through the connection, through the sense of feeling that you belong, and through
injustice. There's one. Injustice. And so we talk about the schema of injustice. This is one of the schemas that's been proposed in the international work groups, a new schema. You could say the 19th schema. So this is another, I think that's a theme as well. This is not fair. This is at the core of it, there's an injustice. I don't get fair access to romantic opportunities. This is not fair. There's this sort of core injustice that drives a lot of this.
And the sense of being deliberately excluded and powerless to affect, powerless to change it. I had, you might have had some clients. I've had some other clients who haven't been referred to by the police, but who have presented and have very similar problems and very similar issues to the incel. And again, their presentation, their clinical presentation is very similar in that they're these guys that they're still living at home, not particularly happy, don't have a particular integrated social network of any description, desperately want to have a relationship, but they're so socially awkward or, struggle with such anxiety around that stuff that they can't navigate, sort of create these opportunities for themselves. And I'm thinking about one guy in particular who was desperate to have a girlfriend, and to try to get his sexual needs met would go to massage parlors, right? And he would be so particular about, like, it'd have to be the cheapest. So he'd have to get his money's worth and all this kind of stuff. So he'd go through and draw and find these situations where it would be the cheapest and most dodgy and the most edgy sort of massage parlor that he would go to have his sexual needs met. And invariably these situations, right, would create opportunities where he would be exploited by the people in these environments. And of course, this reinforced his view that all women are awful and terrible and cannot be trusted and should be punished and so on. So he was getting himself into these situations repeatedly.
What's interesting about what you're saying, though, I think from just the female point of view here, is that
representing Shay.
Represent.
Yeah.
Unsurprisingly, I don't have incel clients. I've never had one, right? However, I do have a lot of clients like what Lars was describing, as in these young men who struggle to get a relationship and they desperately want it. They're inadequate. They often live at home, but they don't have a hatred for women. They don't buy into any ideology about women as a whole being bad, but they have those same other characteristics. So there's some mediating factor here that sends people down the incel path versus those who don't develop those hostile ideations about women, right? So likewise, I work with obviously a lot of adult rapists, right? Men who've raped adult women. Yeah. They have a high degree of hostility towards women, and women are dangerous, that kind of stuff. But yet they're not incels.
So I guess this phenomenon, to a degree, it's like a meme or something. Like it's an ideology. Like there are all these risk factors, but it's only a thing if you grab onto it. It's a kind of, for some, it's a seductive ideology.
And who's going to grab onto it? Because not all young men who have these problems actually do grab onto it, right? I mean, I have a lot of young men who come and see me for treatment. They
might just be violent men or have other risk factors, but they don't grab onto this trope of the self-described incel.
This research study that Lars found, I think is probably a timely point to bring it into the discussion, is the Swansea University research on the incel community. It was commissioned by the Commission for Countering Extremism. It's the largest global study of incels to date. And what they actually found, like we're talking about, the lens of incels has typically been pursued through extremism and in, like, security agencies and police. What this actually found was that it really challenges all those beliefs. It says that they should be, the penultimate sort of summary here basically says the findings describe that this is a desperate, depressed cohort of men, often with poor mental health. And the key is to help them integrate into society and be given appropriate support that, where there's a risk of violence, obviously authorities should be involved. But in general, this is actually not a cohort of people who are particularly...
This is akin to more of a depressed population.
Yeah, violent supportive. And they said that it was only about 5% of the cohort endorsed violence to defend the community. And when they asked if they justified violence, actually most of them said no. Yeah. So they're not actually,
they shouldn't be defined by the extremes in a way. It's probably, in a sense, unfair to define them by the most extreme parts of the ideology.
Yeah,
and that thing about the paper there, Shay, is also that a large portion of them, and this is consistent with my experience of working with these clients, is that are on the spectrum.
Yeah, that's right. That's what they also found, the higher likelihood of a diagnosis for autism spectrum disorder as well.
Can we just quickly say the authors of the paper, like just for listeners
so it's
if they get interested?
University Research on Incel Community produced the report, like the University of Swansea. The specific authors are Dr. Joe Whittaker, Dr. Andrew Thomas, and William Costello from Swansea University Research.
Yeah, thank you.
And that presentation that you described from the research there matches my experience of the clients that I've seen in terms of how they present. They are vulnerable, struggling with a lot of emotional problems, are very awkward socially, struggled interpersonally, even in therapy, struggle to talk, struggle to engage, struggle to identify what they want to get from therapy, that type of thing. So they're anxious and awkward young guys in many cases.
I wonder, Lars, in your experience, have they been, I'm thinking now about the conceptualization in schema. And it sounds like quite clearly schemas to do with social isolation, maybe schemas to do with defectiveness / shame, feeling inadequate or not good enough, getting these messages from your environment. There are some other schemas, I think, too. But I wonder about the core attachment schemas, things like emotional deprivation and abandonment and mistrust. So far, I mean, in the cohorts that I've seen, that those ones haven't been as pronounced. I wonder about your experience. You probably have more severe cohorts working in prisons and things. But
so you're saying that?
Yeah, I haven't found. I found the social alienation to be extreme, characteristic.
Yeah,
and also more like defectiveness, shame. Feeling inadequate as a person. They were sort of very pronounced schemas, less so of the sort of instability, emotional deprivation, the kind of attachment schemas, say to your parents, your family members. This hasn't been as pronounced. So I wonder about the cohorts that you've seen.
Well, I would say definitely the defectiveness and shame, the social isolation, the abuse and mistrust is a relative.
You've seen more of this, abuse and mistrust.
And also, entitlement and grandiosity. So it's almost it's like that's the
coping kind of position.
That's the coping position, to just be on top.
So if we switch to modes
from all this, I'm going to destroy the world.
So if we switch to a mode formulation, and as I would agree with you, I see a lot of vulnerability. There is a lot of vulnerability there for many of these guys. Backgrounds of things like being bullied and all these kind of negative experiences growing up and socializing and things. Also, a lot of angry child mode. So alongside the vulnerability, there's a lot of anger. Oftentimes, would you agree?
Yeah, absolutely.
I love this episode, Shay, because you don't get these guys. So now I get.
I know I'm learning a lot from you guys.
Here you go.
They don't come to see me, but you know what?
Surprise, surprise! They don't want to hear from Shay.
But you know what? It would be a very. I would do my best to be very repairing of those experiences. I actually think incels would really benefit from female therapists, right?
Yeah.
You give them a different experience. Yeah. But
what if they called you a Stacey or something?
Well, maybe as long as it's
I guess
not Becky.
It depends on what they call you. I guess, yeah.
What was the other one?
Becky or Foyd.
Foyd, was it the Foyd?
What's with Foyd? My God,
I don't know. But it's interesting. No, I don't get specific.
I agree with you, Shay. I think that kind of therapy with a female therapist that's warm and engaging and boundaried and able to provide the right kind of messages, I think would be very, very healing. And that's, I think, a lot what they need. Because a lot of the guys, when I've worked with them, things started to go better for them once they got friendships, once they felt valued, once they had connections.
Got some traction in their life.
Yeah. And suddenly, these guys, instead of going on social into these chat rooms, we'll be playing Dungeons and Dragons with, these guys, which is great, right? And that would just fill them up with, suddenly this wasn't so important anymore.
Yeah. Getting some needs met.
Yeah.
So let's continue with our kind of generic mode formulation.
Yeah.
Inner critic. I'm thinking punitive critic. I'm thinking quite negative, self-critical, self-punishing perhaps, and also punishing of others. Quite rigid, strong, punitive critic mode. Would you go with that, Lars?
Absolutely, yeah.
Quite a strong critic presence, basically, within the therapy.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I'm thinking of one individual who I really struggled to connect with partly because I think he had very punitive towards himself, critic towards himself, but it was also sort of directed at everybody else. So it'd be this kind of, I don't know whether it was a suspicious over controller mode. I think
I've definitely found that. I've definitely found that too. There's a sort of punitiveness to self and other. It's not just the self piece. It's like other people, like it's a bit like other people get away with it, like kind of thing.
Yeah, and if you step out of line or you get it wrong,
look, there is this.
You're not in your game, then bang, it's an all or nothing kind of response, which can be, pretty.
Well, then you can get more like the bullying attack or something more overcompensating.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't see that. It was more that sense of utter disdain and then withdrawal. You
got more like avoidance or something.
If you think that their engagement with some of these issues has been through avoidance and then overcompensation in this kind of space.
Can I ask you, did they show often like globalized views, like the incel globalized kind of view about women? Or were they more, did they ever show sort of, particular, responses to particular people with those attitudes? I'm kind of curious about that.
How do you mean?
Okay, so for example, some of the men I've worked with who, have raped adult women, that hostile attitudes towards women, they're sort of globally there, but they're very specific. Like they might have a bad interaction in the servo or something, and they'll go, oh, that fucking bitch, blah, 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 and it's a demonstration of that broader attitude, but it's at a particular person.
Right.
And so I guess I'm asking when you have these guys in therapy, do they talk in, generalities about just this is woe is me, the whole world is like this, or are they able to particularize it and in particular, sort of interactions with people?
So in terms of kind of saying it, is that what you mean? Like I found that with a lot of these guys, it was very generalized. It was so fatalistic, They had the experience of just thinking, well, what's the point? Everyone is like this, even you're like that. It was all nothing, and things went well or there was a pleasant interaction or a pleasant, with the female. I wasn't observed. If there's something went badly, well, that went badly because of this.
Yes. So this actually leads to an interesting thing. So we've set up our conceptualization, but I personally would say that it's not particularly generalized in a sense that when you catch these guys in a sort of healthy adult mode and going about their lives and when they're more engaged in things, they almost sort of don't really espouse these views as much or certainly wouldn't be going on about these kind of things. So I do wonder if these beliefs are kind of become a part of a kind of mode, a coping mode, meaning, and especially triggered when you're disappointed. When you've taken a hit to the self-esteem, when something bad's happened, when you've had a rejection, etc., and then it activates this kind of more black and white worldview about, well, this is because, of the Chads and all these ideas, right?
What is that coping mode, do you think? Yeah, because I think
this is the point, because to me, this is not, they don't walk around all day thinking these things. Like the guys that I've talked to, they're just normal guys in many ways. They have jobs, they have lives in the gym, they go, different things. But this kind of mental set, a mode, if you like, it gets activated and then it's extreme, right? And then they think about some of these other ideas that we might think, wow, come on, these ideologies. You know what I mean, Lars? It's not that they're walking around thinking about this all the time.
Well, we know, then this is what the research is telling us as well, is that these guys are struggling emotionally a lot.
My guess, I don't think there's been any research, and so that's completely disagree with. A part of it feels, I know you've used the word entitlement, and I do think there can be an aggrandizing element, but a lot of it feels a bit like helpless surrenderer, within our model. It feels like they've given up on romance from this position. It's like, it feels like giving up. I've given up on this. I've given up on that. Hope, sex, all these things. There's no chance.
I would agree. Definitely. It feels like a helpless
giving up.
Yeah.
Kind of thing. But also in that as well, I should give up because there's literally no chance. Like we are behind the eight ball, or it's not fair. You got the sort of it's not fair narrative.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
That-
all of their ideology and their words and their terms are perhaps, sort of a massive justification for that as to why you don't try. So you
and I mean,
shift out of the compliant surrenderer into the healthy adults. Like, well, here's all the evidence to show what's the point. Why?
And part of me thinks, like, when I hear some of these things, we've all got that mate who is not traditionally attractive, who is absolutely great with women because of his personality, or he's got good words, or So
not all women are Stacey's, right?
Right. Only 20%
women are capable of connecting.
Only 20%
with people,
apparently. Right.
Capable of connecting because of characteristics other than their physicality.
Correct.
Right? Wow,
Correct.
Who would have thought?
So Rob, are you saying with the helpless surrenderer mode that like, I don't think that that's the mode that they're in when they are thinking of these fantasies and they are thinking.
No, you mean about the violence?
Yeah, like
I think that's bully and attack, or some form of aggrandizing bully and attack.
Yeah, I think there's an aggrandizing element to it. I think because a lot of these guys spend their time in fantasy. That's the truth. They're not going around.
This is an overcompensator mode of some kind. They're fantasizing about having power and dealing with it in a certain way.
Writing this testimony where they set it up, it's all so detailed about how they're going to get everybody back and who they're going to get back. And
so this would be a risk factor, Lars. The ones who are stuck in more the helplessness, right, and the narrative of poor me because I've been victimized by others, and also women now, by the way. This kind of narrative is more akin to what we would call the helpless surrenderer mode in schema therapy. But the ones who sort of graduate or they have it in their personality to be more overcompensatory and more violent, more controlling, more active to deal with the feeling, this could be a risk factor for things like violence.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense.
That fits very much with violence more generally when we make sense of violence, in other populations and other people.
So in some ways you'd get different profiles. I know we're very speculating here, guys. Why not? It's our podcast. You get a more depressed
the research hasn't been done, right? So, I mean...
Right, this is all speculative, guys. There'd be a more sort of depressed pathway, helplessness, hopelessness kind of thing. Which does fit the data so far. You said in general that's how a lot of these guys look in terms of mental health. And you might have the sort of a smaller amount of people that get a lot of headlines that are more the antisocial type pathway, where it turns into like overcompensation, grandizement, potentially, and potential violence.
Yeah, I would say that though an aspect of the incel culture is the resentment and grievance around not being able to, in their view, access sexual opportunity. So there's got to be that element to it. Like, you see depressed people who will sit in that helpless surrenderer mode, but they're not necessarily resentful and grievance orientated towards women.
I think so. I mean, I think it would hold a grievance. I'll tell you why.
Yeah.
And this is, again, all speculative. We all know with the helpless surrenderer, you sometimes get that helpless surrenderer where it's more about the workplace. Like the focus is, it's not fair because, work cover did this to me, my job, they didn't care. And they get very, very grievance focused, almost like a victimhood. And I think that's the second part actually of his triad. He said, this is Cotty, by the way, the sort of the three parts to it. The worldview. What was it, guys?
Yeah.
What were the three parts? I'm sorry, I've kind of missed it.
Misogyny. What was it? Cotty?
Victimhood. There you go. Victimhood. So the victimhood piece, right, is in our model maybe the helpless surrenderer. It's seeing yourself as a victim of the circumstances. Yeah. So sorry, I've actually lost the three pieces.
Fatalism and misogyny.
Yeah, fatalism is also to do with helpless surrenderer.
Helpless surrenderer.
And then the misogyny piece, that seems to be more like overcompensating, maybe.
That's again blame on top, right? That's
yeah.
So the emojis,
putting others down.
Rob, were
misogyny
like
is about putting
resentment, shame, and revenge were the ones that you highlighted. That's
right.
That's Cotton's research, yeah.
And the revenge piece is overcompensation, and this is where you get fantasies and bully and attack type fantasies and things. So I've got a few, interesting things that came up, and I wonder what you think, Lars.
Go on.
First of all, you sort of said, and I think it tracks as therapists, as male therapists, oftentimes, I'm a clinical psychologist, and I'll be seeing oftentimes females that have been through things like complex trauma, and they might have had terrible relationships with men over the years, been traumatized by men, been sexually abused by men in their life and things. And it's often said that I've always run into this idea that, you're a man, so, Jenny shouldn't see a man because you're a man and she's been through a trauma with a man, right? And I've always come to the conclusion that that's fair enough, especially if she wouldn't, if the client wouldn't get in a room with a man as a therapist, then of course you should maybe seek a female to get things started. But like you, Shay, it reminded me what you said. I've always thought that ultimately the best thing for someone like that's been through terrible experiences with men in their lives is to eventually be able to seek the help of a male therapist who can have a better relationship with them. Something that's nurturing and safe and respectful.
Yeah, I agree.
Think
totally.
This kind of flips it the other way. It's the same idea, actually, what you're talking about. I just wanted to say that. I think it makes a lot of sense what you say, Shay, that ultimately, if a therapist like yourself, a female therapist, was able to engage these guys, this would ultimately be, I think, very therapeutic. The other thing that I've thought about a little bit, Lars, is some of the dynamic between two male therapists, where one person in the dynamic, the client, self-identifies as an incel, and on the other hand, the therapist is traditionally probably successful, within capitalism, maybe running their own practice, has their own family. In other words, in their minds, you might be a Chad.
Yeah. Are they going to seek out Chad?
And then, so you're in this dynamic now where you see what I'm getting at? Like, is there this sort of undercurrent of
what you're saying
masochism? Is that what you're saying?
You're saying that whether you're male or female, you can end up in the wrong bucket with incels, in terms of where you fit in.
Well, there's one dynamic because, Shay, you have to deal with, the females have to deal with their feelings about, the way they see women and all those things, which would be one set of feelings. But there's a different potential dynamic here between a client who sees themselves as unattractive in the world and in the marketplace, and potentially seeking the help from a male that is in this 20% or does that make sense? Like someone who's traditionally successful, who's married.
Where would those beliefs, because I would think that those ideas and beliefs sit within a particular mode. I think that when they flip out of that mode and they're more vulnerable and they're more connected
totally,
and defectiveness and
this makes sense.
You can do that, but when they flip into that stuff and that becomes then a point of contention.
So actually the problem would be when they flip into either like a helpless surrenderer style mode.
Yeah, what would you know? What would you know because you're so successful? What would you know because you're a woman?
Yeah. That's when it'll come up.
Helpless surrender, give up. You wouldn't understand me because, or it flips into the bully and attack, self-aggrandizer mode. Well,
for those men who don't have
I actually don't think that I mean, in my experience with clients who have presented like this, they don't do that in the room with you. They do it.
I would agree. It's always been something in my mind
that
a little bit
write online.
Like I got to admit that's always. I think I've always been able to engage these kind of clients fairly well, and I haven't really found that to be an issue. But it's in the back of my mind a little bit as well. Whether there's a part of them that bothers them or. Because technically in the model, in their ideology, this could be triggering anger.
How could you draw that out in treatment? You're like self-identifying as Chad? Is that what you're saying?
No.
Is that aggrandizing?
I think, but here's the thing. I think anyone who has access to the gene pool is a Chad, like in this ideology. So I guess so, in a way.
It gets a bit weird, doesn't it?
Fair call. It does. It's more for me. It's about. we're not walking around thinking I'm a Chad, but within that ideology, people who are traditionally I'm talking too much now. People who are traditionally successful, financially and they might have a family and stuff. These are people who are looked down upon.
Yeah, absolutely. And it would be anyone that is marginally successful in terms of even having friends or having the opportunity to go out and about, I think would fit into that bucket.
I've got a few friends, okay, Lars. I've got a few friends.
Yeah.
All right. So, I mean, I don't know. Do you think this sort of conceptualization is what, how you might think about some of these things? Look, the other thing, there's often a lot of more stock standard modes involved, like avoidant protector. Can be a lot of avoidance, other things like work or achievement-based things, dating, because of course the helpless surrender, it lets you off the hook. Like you don't have to go out and try things out or break the patterns,
That's right.
Yeah, the ideology lets you off the hook because within the ideology, there's no point. Yeah.
That's right. And it would be an unbearable space to be in that helpless surrender, which that unbearableness speaks to the fact that in the research that we quoted from Swansea University, one of the statistics that they point or highlight is that 1 in 3 incel that they included contemplated suicide every day over a 2-week period.
These are really sad people, aren't they? Like they're people are very lonely and unhappy men in general. I think that whole, therapy goal, isn't it, is sort of like that, like Lars, you mentioned before, getting them connected to something, some kind of connection that is not the incel connection, but something else, something pro-social, something where they have a bit of value, they can be a bit successful, it sort of shapes up that potential for people, and hopefully they move towards it and away from this other stuff.
Yeah. I was going to ask you, Rob, in terms of your experience working with these kinds of issues, what have you found has worked? Like what I found that with these guys, it's sometimes very difficult to get them to buy into therapy because they are so, and I think that's very, very challenging. And I think that what has helped from my observation, what has helped me is conceptualizing it within a forensic schema therapy lens and being able to see that their behavior sits within, the behavior that the reason why they get referred to the clinic, writing these plans to go and commit mass murder is really just a function of this overcompensating mode that is trying to soothe sense of distress and isolation and defectiveness and pain that they feel inside. And it feels good, I think, when they engage those fantasies, right? So being able to conceptualize this issue and them as clients in through the modes is really, really helpful.
I found that too. And honestly, I found a lot of this stuff doesn't come up that often within the therapy. The focus is actually on the issues, my loneliness, my sense of isolation, my sense of failure, trying to improve my life, so I don't have all these feelings. So in some ways, actually, the treatment is quite traditional.
What I was going to say,
it's acting more like a depressed client, actually.
Which is what this research indicates. It's not so much about de-radicalizing a lot of the people. I mean, you've obviously always going to have that extreme element, but that seems to be kind of a small amount.
If you help people feel connected and feel a bit successful in the world and have
valued,
interest,
to feel valued, by people.
They don't need these kind of ideologies as much, or a community of people like that.
But also to re-engineer the values in a way as well. And I was thinking, like in terms of preventing people being an incel or getting into the point where they identify as that. I mean, how do you do that? I mean, you're looking at teenage boys, perhaps, aren't you? How do they value? What do they value? You mentioned before about these things about.
It's funny though. Like I don't know. The guys that I've seen, I wonder what you think. They're all sort of above 30. Like I don't think they're a bunch of 17-year-olds trying to get into the incel kind of community.
No,
I reckon. I think guys who are early 20s, and I think guys who are north of 30, early 30s.
Yeah, no,
I would say that what I've found is contextual strategies seem to really be very powerful for them, and that contextual strategies in terms of like getting them helping them get a job, getting getting them a situation where they have some social contact with like-minded individuals, and like-minded individuals, not within the incel community, of course, but
but healthy versions,
that they have an interest in, like hobbies, like Dungeons and Dragons seems to be a reoccurring thing. Playing that, fantasy role play, and getting a little, getting a group together, and that seemed.
Well, everybody needs their tribe, and in the absence of one, I guess they will create one, like kind of thing. So yeah, totally, I agree with you, Lars. Keeping things focused on getting your needs met, getting the needs met for social affiliation, connection, even job stuff. I was going to ask you about that too. The ones that I've had have struggled with the sort of job side of it, and would often have actually failure schemas as well.
Yeah.
Have you found that also? There's sort of a degree where they don't feel successful in the world. They feel left out of capitalism as well.
They feel they've had jobs where they are working in a factory, have been for the last 10 years, and hate their job and hate.
Yeah, and it's not seen as traditionally successful, right?
Yeah, and everything about it is just feels.
So this sort of adds into the sense of the inner critic and a sense of failure and things, and
then they have that typical failure kind of trap where they'll want to do something different, and then make an attempt or move towards doing something different, and then the first hurdle is you got to get this certificate, or you got to go back and do this, and then it'll be just all right, see, that's it, I can't do it, it's too much.
Avoidance. So there's another one. So a lot of avoidance, right? This is a theme, right?
Yeah.
I guess between the two of us, there can be a lot of avoidant protector as well.
What have you found has been particularly helpful for your clients who present like this?
Yeah, no, I agree. It's a lot of behavioral work, actually. Ultimately helping them to find ways of getting their needs met for real in context in the world. So getting connected in small groups, finding their tribe, that kind of thing's been really important, and also in the workforce. Helping them to connect in the workforce, get some degree of satisfaction and success. And being remunerated and things, and getting happy in that way, in the workplace. These have been quite successful over the years. So, and of course, to get there, having to do the traditional techniques around working with chair work and working with the critic, processing old trauma memories, via things like imagery rescripting. So, talking about traditional schema therapy, but some of those behavioural sort of actually finding ways to reconnect with the community being very important. Yeah,
absolutely.
The one thing I was trying to mention before, I do think there is something about, it's a combination of those personal vulnerabilities or characteristics, or histories like bullying, rejection, alienation, poor social skills, shyness, that kind of stuff, but also the combination with the internet, like we said, but the problematic cultural messaging about stereotypes in women as well, and sex, which is kind of my allusion to teenage boys before, which is, like the concepts and the ideas that they get, they're simplistic and stereotyped ideas about women. Okay. That is relevant because that's kind of the whole ideology is based on this wacky concept of women, right? That's not remotely sort of centered. And it's like, how do people, and you would think that with a combination of people that have that, shyness, perhaps autism, social skill problems, bullying, rejection, they're not also getting good messages about, sex, love, relationships, the opposite sex kind of thing.
Yeah, there's a piece about social media, isn't there, I think, and just society in general. And I guess I was saying to you offline as well, this kind of sexual marketplace idea is something that I think has more prominence outside of the incel community. I think they of course gravitate towards that idea. This is the idea of
OnlyFans and things like that. Really propagate
but this
sort of stuff. Yeah, where you think, and there is like really problematic sort of representations of women and sex and what you should
where they're valuing themselves, for example, in the marketplace in a particular way.
Yeah.
But the other side of that is you get the incel phenomenon, but then you see the other side of that is you might get more of the OnlyFans type thing, or the idea that you're getting attention and things in that way is the only way to be a woman.
But if they're also getting their education predominantly through, the algorithms and the kind of stuff off the internet, you don't want young men being educated that way about, especially people who might have difficulties figuring that stuff out. You don't want that being their primary vehicle of education, so it sort of like really highlights the extra importance of, as young men, you have teenage boys or young men in your world. How were the other healthy men talking to them?
And I hate to say it, I hate to be that, we're banging on about this, but if you look at this idea, right? They believe a rigidly hierarchical sexual marketplace where physical characteristics such as height and bone structure and muscle mass determine value. This is a sort of narcissistic view of the worth of people and males.
Completely.
It's sort of seeing it as a sort of marketplace, and you're good enough to the degree, as a person, to the degree that you fit a sort of an image.
Yeah, and it's a very stereotypical way of understanding complex issues like, how to be romantic, how to have a relationship, how to get sex, how to have those things that everybody desires and wants, but they're not easy for anyone necessarily to navigate always, and so they demonize it in a way, and it's a, that the internet and social media is the most horrible way that you would want to educate anyone on that. But these incels spend a huge portion of their time in those spaces, which is problematic.
And these worldviews, a more, can we say, a more narcissistic worldview, where the value of people is based on things like appearance and how many likes you get and stuff. So this is the sort of background context to the phenomenon, which is like one part of that, or one symptom.
Yeah, exactly.
So I guess we're arguing a sort of socio-cultural sort of viewpoint.
Yeah, because I kind of think, we all have teenage boys, and I think, well, how do you look at them and think you wouldn't want them to be vulnerable to adopting any of that? You have to have lots of conversations with people about it. They have to have lots of that kind of stuff. And if you have young men growing up in environments where that just doesn't happen, that would be a vulnerability or a risk factor towards it, I would imagine.
Yeah. I think also what we know is that a lot of these guys actually struggle just generally with social skills and being able to connect with people. So it's specific here because it's been amplified through the social media maybe, but they struggle with just being able to form relationships across the board. And it almost becomes like, like in these groups, like everything gets amplified because, it's just an echo chamber, right?
Yeah. So I guess I want to finish by just saying, if you or someone that might be suffering or aligning yourself with these kind of things, there is help out there, and I think that is really valuable, to reach out to folks. People doing a lot of schema work. I'm sure other approaches can be quite interesting as well, in helping people deal with the ways in which you feel underneath, something, being isolated from things, being alone, the depressed element. So I would encourage anyone who aligns themselves in this way, or that might suffer from other feelings underneath that, or if you know people that do, to help them link up with licensed mental health professionals. I really think can make a big difference. Definitely. But that's all we've got for today. Hey, we tackled the incel phenomenon. I guess the last thing I quickly want to say, like partly what I got really interested in this too, is there's another phenomenon within this, which is the word incel has gotten to the point now where it's just like a disparaging term. So you'll see it used on the internet as a sort of, if you don't agree with someone, you're an incel, or like something like that. So that's another part of this. It's kind of interesting. It's taken on, it's gone beyond something now that's even an unuseful term.
It's
become a meme. Yeah,
it's been incorporated into the common vernacular, hasn't it? Slang. Yeah, but and so people have adopted it with slightly different meaning using that word, but it's not. Yeah. It's not perhaps what we've been.
Lars, you don't agree with me. You're an incel. All right, mate. Just a reminder to folks that Lars and Shay and myself run schema therapy trainings through our online training platform, schematherapytrainingonline.com. I myself, along with Chris Hayes, run basic schema therapy trainings for mental health professionals, whereas Shay and Lars specialise in schema therapy training for forensic mental health. And you want to just remind folks of the 2 courses that you've got on our platform, Lars?
Yeah, so we've got a level 1 forensic schema therapy. This is an introduction course that just goes over the key concepts associated with forensic schema therapy, how it's slightly different to regular schema therapy, and some of the ways that we might view things or make sense of things in this kind of context, to give you a bit of a background and a foundation to starting your schema journey with forensic clients. And then the second course is called A Hero's Journey, Forensic Schema Sessions. And what that is really a single case study that we've that you follow from beginning to end of therapy, where you see key junctures in terms of engaging a client, a violent client in this particular, a violent offender in this particular case, with schema therapy from beginning to end. And each clip demonstrates the skills, demonstrates the technique with the client, and is meticulously analysed by Shay beforehand. So you have, in this training, you have this wonderful opportunity where the clip is analysed initially, and then you see it being sort of acted out between me and the client.
And I would Lars and our actor client is doing a phenomenal job of making it extremely realistic if you've ever worked with sort of the angry type of forensic client. So that's us.
Yeah, I love it. I love your course. I particularly enjoyed the course 2, where you have an actor. What's your actor's name?
Mirko.
Yeah, isn't he like a BAFTA award-winning actor or something? Or
yeah, he's been in Aussie productions and stuff like that, and he's actually one of the actually a teacher down at the drama school here in Brisbane. Yeah, Mirko Zini is his name.
He's got back in touch and says, "Oh, when are we going to do part 2? When are we going to do
part 3 and stuff?" What I really liked, just to share with your viewers, those of you that practice schema therapy, Lars does a really great, imagery rescript with a parent in the image that's very violent and scary, and the level of assertiveness is a lot higher than you might see in, let's say, ordinary schema therapy. So that was a highlight for me. So thanks for everyone for listening to this episode 5 of Beyond the Crime, your semi-monthly schema therapy deep dive into forensic schema therapy. We'll be back in about a month's time. I hope you guys enjoyed today. See you guys next month.
Thanks, Rob. Thanks, Lars.
Thanks, guys.
See you later.
If you're interested in learning more about schema therapy, join us in A Hero's Journey, the schema therapy sessions at schematherapytrainingonline.com.